insane. And everything that I thought was going to be awesome wasn't awesome. So, yes, I could have plugged in the projector, but I didn't because I didn't get time. So we're making do with this guy. All right. So, it's kind of fitting in a way, and you made this point earlier this morning, is that there's kind of a message in this, right? But your message was that maybe Satan's attacking me, right? That the things are chaos because maybe Satan's trying to stop me from doing what I'm doing. Then I thought about it. I'm like, well, maybe. Because my immediate response was maybe I just suck at scheduling, which is true. But when I sat back and I thought about, well, maybe it's more of an affirmation for what I'm going to talk about today. It's going to make sense later on. Ashley, hand me that red book. I forgot to grab it. Thank you. So I'm going to talk about stories. This is The Hobbit. So what's interesting about stories is that when you go to the theater or you read books or you read like short stories on the internet or whatever, you get two reactions. Either you're like, okay, well that was something. I mean, I paid money for that, so I guess I'll try to enjoy it. Or you walk away with some kind of a feeling, right? You get either nostalgic or you get this feeling of connection with the characters. What's interesting is that that's what Tolkien called secondary belief. See, primary belief is what's going on right now. Me talking to you all is primary belief. When you walk away, you say, oh, we went to church. The pastor's son gave us a sermon. This is more of a lecture, really. It's just my style. But that's primary belief. The secondary belief is the thing that triggers what isn't tangible. The emotions, the application to your spiritual walk. That's kind of a secondary belief. But what's interesting about these stories, the ones that really mean something to you, is that it triggers a secondary belief that everyone wants, right? The most popular stories, let's do a really popular one, is like the Avengers. The death of Tony Stark meant something to a lot of people. But, say what?
Okay.
Well, no, it did. It did, because Tony Stark, what he did is him and the Avengers went back in time. And what they did is, okay, we're going to stop Thanos from like destroying everything and recreating reality. So we're going to go back in time, but Tony Stark had a dilemma. Because in their universe, Tony Stark was dead. So they were going to go back and get Tony Stark and get it all. But Tony Stark in the past, or in the alternate universe, had to make a choice. Am I going to go back in time? Am I going to go back in time, ruin my life that I have now? I have a wife and a kid. He's essentially going back in time and killing them, right? He's stopping that opportunity from happening by going back and stopping Thanos as Tony Stark. What happened at the end of the Avengers was that Tony Stark died anyway. Right? But deep down inside, everyone was like, why do you have to die? That's interesting. That's secondary belief. Why do humans get those emotions like, why do you have to die? But then also, why do humans get that secondary belief trigger when we watch things like The Hobbit, and we're like, or we read The Hobbit, or The Lord of the Rings, and we're like, why did he have to go? He was my favorite. I liked him. Why did Frodo abandon Samwise Gamgee at the top of the mountain to go with Gollum? Like, Frodo, don't be an idiot. Sam's obviously the good guy here. I mean, look at it. That's an interesting thing. The interesting thing is we automatically recognize the good guys from the bad guys without them even opening their mouths. Isn't that interesting? That's not primary belief. There isn't people, the bad guys in the real world don't walk around wearing trench coats, black, or all shriveled, and throw lightning from their hands, right? But that's secondary belief. We immediately acknowledge who the good guys are and the bad guys are. That's what we call symbology. That's the symbolism of the story. Now something's gone wrong with the stories, right? The Joker's now a relatable figure. The Batman's a confused guy who has parents' issues because his parents were killed, but yet he's got to do justice. But at the same time, he really wants to hurt the injustice. So Batman has a little bit of bad guy in him. The Joker's got a little bit of good guy in him. But here's the other thing. Nobody really sticks with those stories. When was the last time somebody talked to you about how awesome the Batman movie was? Usually lasts 1 or 2 weeks. But stories like this, people talk about The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings all the time. People talk about Star Wars all the time. Let me give you an example. So in the first page, the first paragraph of The Hobbit, in a hole in the ground there lived a hobbit, not a nasty, dirty, wet hole filled with the ends of worms and an oozy smell, nor yet a dry, bare, sandy hole with nothing in it to sit down on or to eat. It was a hobbit hole, and that means comfort. So if you've ever read The Hobbit or watched the movies, you immediately get an imagery, right? You get an image in your head of what a hobbit looks like and what a hobbit hole looks like. Now, even before the movie, some people were like, oh, hobbits. Now, what's interesting is that when you compare the great stories that we hold on to, and you compare them to the modern stories, something has gone wrong. There's been this sort of parasite. So we're going to go back, and we're going to look at, We're going to look at before the dark times, before the empire. Thank you, Ashley. That was funny. Okay, so Samwise had this quote, but what's interesting about this quote is it's not really Samwise. It's actually Tolkien. Every time you have these profound things and you go read other Tolkien writings, which we're going to talk about a few of them today, is that there are these points where they say something so true that it triggers that secondary belief. Something that you know is true and you want so badly in the real world. But it's not there. But these stories make you at least hope for it. Or try and orchestrate it in the real world. That's where we get my people, the nerds. We all go out and we're like, listen, things are bad out here, guys. Rather than locking ourselves in our basement and playing D&D and video games, how about we try and recreate this thing? That's where we get like Comic-Con and comic book stores and all these things, is that these people tried to get... Don't you laugh at me. I saw you. Okay. So that's where we get the culminations of these cultures trying to live out or experience this thing that's in these stories that they care about so much. It used to be Superman. It used to be Batman. It used to be, well, Aquaman's not really a superhero, but we won't get into that. So Samwise says, it's like in the great stories, Mr. Frodo, the ones that really mattered, full of darkness and danger they were. And something you didn't want to know, and sometimes you didn't want to know the end. Because how could the end be happy? How could the world go back to the way it was when so much bad had happened? But in the end, it's only a passing thing. The shadow. Even darkness must pass. A new day will come, and when the sun shines, it will shine the clearer. Those were the stories that stayed with you, that meant something, even if you were too small to understand why. But I think, Mr. Frodo, I do understand. I know now folk in those stories had lots of chances of turning back. Only they didn't. They kept going because they were holding on to something that that there's some good in the world, Mr. Frodo, and it's worth fighting for. See, like immediately you're like, yeah, Sam's my man. I like Sam. A lot of Tolkien fans say Sam's the real hero of Lord of the Rings, because every time Frodo makes a mistake, Sam's there to pick him up. And when you start reading Lewis, and you start reading Tolkien, you start to find something similar, is that Tolkien had a lot of the attributes of Sam, and Lewis had a lot of the attributes of Frodo. That's where things start to break down a little bit between reality and what Tolkien called fantasy, or fairy stories. So when Tolkien's talking about fairy stories, he's not just saying nursery stories or these cute things that get your kid to sleep real quick. He's talking about stories that actually stick with a kid. So this might be a little lengthy, but I think it's vital for what we're talking about. Oh no, you closed it all. Give me 1 second. I mean, think about it. Think about the stories that stuck with you when you were a kid, but eventually one day you were like Peter Pan in a way, where you had to like, well, I guess it's time to grow up. We're just gonna leave this story behind. I guess it doesn't mean anything really. I guess being good isn't that good because Joe down the street, he's not good. So maybe the fairy stories are just a way to keep kids calm. But Tolkien doesn't say that. Come on, machine. It's going to be like that. I told you it was a week, guys. I told you it was a week. There we go. Okay. So in Tolkien wrote an essay, and this was shortly after, or during the time when C.S. Lewis was. Okay, so let's back up. Give you a little bit of introduction. C.S. Lewis wrote Narnia, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. He also wrote the books that we're going through in our apologetics class, starting with Mere Christianity. Him and Tolkien were like bros. You know what I mean? They were super close. But Tolkien was a linguist. He studied languages, and Lord of the Rings only came about because he's like, you know what? I got this really cool language. It's got really cool writing, and I want a story for it. So he developed the Elves, and he called it the Elven language, or Tengwar is the written form. So he wrote this story, and it became a huge hit. And Lewis, at that time, they were both going back and forth, but Lewis stuck with this idea of fairy stories because he thought there was actually something in the idea of all these old tales and the similarities between them and the similarity in meanings between them all. So much so to the point where he thought he was going to write his own sort of personal book that will just hit him every time he read it. So what he did is he got a journal. He started reading poetry because he was really big on poetry. And so every time he found a piece of poetry that meant so much to him, he wrote it down. And then he'd add to it. A year later, maybe a year or two later, he comes back to this book of poetry. He starts reading. He's like, all this stuff means nothing to me now. I'm not even the same person I was a year ago. And then he got real depressed because, like, if I can't even assemble art that's meaningful to me throughout my entire life, what hope is there? Then he had a talk with Tolkien. And we'll get to that talk in a minute. But the Tolkien really hit to the core of what C.S. Lewis was. Because at the core, Lewis was a philosopher. He loved philosophy and he loved talking about it. But there was always this thing about the stories and the meaningfulness of stories that he could never figure out until Tolkien explained it to him. So we're going to start here. So in this section called Children, I will now turn to children, and so come to the last and most important of the three questions. What, if any, are the values and functions of fairy stories? It is usually assumed that children are the natural or the special appropriate audience. Appropriate audience for fairy tales. In describing a fairy story, which they think adults might possibly read for their own entertainment, reviewers frequently indulge in such waggeries as this book is for children from the ages of 6 to 60. But I have never yet seen the puff of a new motorcycle that began thus. This toy will amuse infants from 17 to 70. Though that, to my mind, would be much more appropriate. Is there any essential connection between children and fairy stories? Is there any call for comment if any adult reads them for himself? Reads them as tales, that is, not studies them for a curious... let me try that one again. Reads them as tales, that is, not studies them as curies. Adults are allowed to collect and study anything, even old theater programs or paper bags. Among those will still have enough wisdom not to think fairy stories pernicious. The common opinion seems to be that there is a natural connection between the minds of children and fairy stories, of the same order as the connection between children's bodies and milk. I think this is an error. At best, an error of false sentiment, and one that is therefore most often made by those who, for whatever private reason, such as childlessness, tend to think of children as a special kind of creature, almost a different race, rather than a normal, if immature, member of a particular family and the human family at large. So Tolkien goes on to explain that this idea of shoving certain items, such as fairy stories, just for the nursery is not only, he actually uses the word stupid. It's stupid, but it is a waste. Because the good fairy stories always end up meaning a lot. Who knows what that's from? Beauty and the Beast. Okay. You better not smile, because I'm going to say something real nerdy, okay? This is my favorite Disney movie. Here's why. A lot of people get confused because they think Belle is the main character. She's an important character. But really, the prince, the Beast, is the main character. Why do we say that? The first 5 minutes in this collage is the story of the Beast and how he became the Beast. Who remembers how that happened? Why did the prince become a beast?
He was handsome and he found out everybody else was ugly and was mean and wrong.
That's close, yeah. What the witch said was he had no love within him. That's interesting. What do we call beings with no love in them? Monsters, beasts, animals, creatures. They're not human. Hitler's a good example. No humanity, no love within them. In this story, love is intrinsically connected to humanity, what it means to be human. But also, it's an essential thing. So much so that the witch is like, I'm going to teach this kid a lesson. So what she does is she turns him into a beast, and she says by his 21st birthday, which is very important, his 21st birthday, he has to find love. So what happens? Well, Disney goes ahead and fills in some story there for the kids. But the real story continues. The real story continues. The real story continues as soon as they start coexisting in this castle. Now, the castle looks like a castle for entertainment. But castles can mean a lot of things, especially in their situation. They're both trapped there. She chose to be there to save her father, but he is there by force, right? He can't go out in the world like he is. Frankenstein tried that. Didn't go very well, right? So they're both trapped in this castle. But the interesting thing about Belle is we already know what her desires are. She had a whole song about it. She's reading, remember the song? He doesn't turn into Prince Charming until chapter 3. And then the sheep eats the page, and then we all go on with our lives. I know a lot about the movie, okay? So they're trapped in this castle. Belle wants her Prince Charming that she's read about all her life. But she's in a castle with a prince, but that's not good enough. So then what happens is the Beast is like, I gotta fix this rose thing, or I'm gonna be a beast the rest of my life, and I don't want that. So he's like, I gotta find somebody to love, and he's really angry about it. He's like, I'm gonna make her love me. Guys, women, guys do that? Or do guys do like, hey, I'm gonna make you love me. And then they get all hopped up. Now here's where it gets real interesting, because the counterpart to the Beast is who? He has a song. Gaston. Gaston is the opposite of what the Beast is trying to be, but yet they're the same. And Belle has already rejected Gaston. She's like, I don't want anything to do with you. You're stupid. You have an IQ of 30. You have nothing to go. All you care about is yourself. He is also without love. But yet Belle fell in love with the Beast. How? Well, according to Disney and according to the original stories, nature took its course. In the song, now if you pay attention to the songs, they're brilliant. Because in the song, Mrs. Potts says, and then one begins to bend. Right? In the beginning of the movie, Beast is like, fine, you can stay in your room. And she's like, fine. And he says, fine again. And they stumble off and she stays in her room for however long. So the Beast won that match, you could say. But then they're having dinner together. And then Belle is the one that bends. There is something Disney is trying to tell us, and the old stories are trying to tell us about men and women relationships. Okay, ladies, you are the ones who tame the Beast. You don't do anything. Sometimes it can just be a look. You know the mom look. When your mom gives you a look, she's like, you better cut it out or I'll end you. That's one of those looks. But that happens in the movie too. In the movie, all Belle does is give her a look, and they sing about that one too. Because the beast is like, I've never looked at someone that way before. And they're both talking about this. But we're getting into the symbology now. The symbology is that what's interesting is when Belle starts singing, she's singing the same tune that she's singing in the beginning when she's talking about chapter 3. The same exact tune, just different words. Because she realizes that, hey, this guy's not bad. He's a monster right now, but he's changing. Monsters don't change. Vampires don't change. Frankenstein doesn't change. He gets smarter, but he's still a monster. Werewolves don't change, right? There's something about this animal that changes. Here's where it gets really crazy, okay? In the story, The Princess and the Frog, the frog makes a proposition to the princess and says, hey, it feels like he's dragging her along. Hey, if you do this for me, I'll turn into a prince. Oh, well, you also got to do this for me, and then I'll turn into a prince. All the princess wants is a golden ball at the bottom of a pond or a lake, but she doesn't want to get wet to go get it. Now, hold on to that pond analogy because it's real important later on when we get to 1 Kings, which is what we're going to dive into today. The frog is an interesting symbol in this sort of symbology. In the same way, monsters are this thing that the prince goes and slays to get the princess, which is another analogy within Beauty and the Beast, is the beast has to kill part of himself in order to find the love. And this is a universal story, is that the man has to go out, slay the beast to become better, to be worthy of the love of the woman. That's the story. That's also the story in Beauty and the Beast, is that the beast has to slay himself, which is Gaston, on the roof. Gaston, the other image of himself, the selfless version of himself, he's got to throw him off the roof and kill him, and then he transforms into a prince, and then they live happily ever after. Okay, the same thing with the frog and the princess. The frog knows, hey, I'm used to be a human, but the princess is like, I just want the golden ball. Belle was the same way. I just want the prince. I just want the prince. That's all I want. And the princess with the ball is like, I just want the ball. The frog is like, okay, I'll get you the ball. And the beast is like, I'm a prince. You know I am. I've got a talking wardrobe. Okay? How much more princely can he be? So, what's interesting about the frog, though, is the frog has a wider meaning. It is also a beast. But it is a different type of beast. Because in fairy tales, in fairy stories, the pond and water, caves, and the underworld are places of chaos, which is why the princess doesn't want to go in there. It's like, if I go get wet, who knows what'll happen in there, here on the outside world. The water represents a chaos, a sort of area to be tamed or survived. So the frog, traditionally, not just in this story, but stories all over the place, are these transitional forms. It's not a mammal, it's not a land creature, it's not a water creature, it does both. It swims, it doesn't swim. When it's an infant, it's like this little tadpole thing, but then it gets legs, and it's like, what do we call this thing? So it transitions. But what's interesting about the ball is it's a symbol of prize. That this frog, it's different than the normal beasts, because it actually helps people in what they're doing. You know what I mean? It got the princess the ball. Other beasts don't help, even if they're like from Beauty and the Beast. So the frog gets the ball and brings it back from the chaos into the normal world. Okay, so we're going to get into some modern day content. Trigger warning. One of these images seems offensive, but we'll go through it. Okay, this guy, Pepe. Huge internet figure. Came about 5-6 years ago. 4. It was about the time Trump said he was going to go be president, because that's what's key about this frog, is that initially this thing's just creepy, right? It's just weird. It doesn't even look like a frog. It's like a mixture of frog and person. Okay, so the internet, what everyone calls the internet trolls, the people who create chaos on the internet, grab this image and the cartoon behind it, because the cartoon's equally creepy. It's got some weird things going on. Not like gross creepy, but it's just odd. And what they did is things got really crazy. And I don't know if you can see what's going on here. Like everything's going on here. I can't zoom in. So we've got Pepe as like a cute emoji. We've got Pepe as a Pokemon, but he's still Pepe. Pepe as a minion, a bee, the Illuminati pyramid. It's a game company, king, he's Trump, he's whatever that is. There's a lot of chaos happening. And you immediately see that picture of chaos. And this happens every time when you see a frog in history, in fairy stories in history, as you see chaos emerge. And here's where it gets crazy, is because these fairy stories are starting to bleed into reality. And that's the only way you can describe it, is that we're seeing a narrative, what I call divine narrative, emerge in reality, in real time, kind of like you see in the Old Testament. The Old Testament, the prophets were doing things that had meaning. See, in the ancient world, the prophets had symbology. And the people had symbology. They looked for symbols. For example, when Moses, maybe it's not Moses. Let's not use that one because I can't remember. Baptism. Baptism is a good one. Oh man, I'm skipping ahead. Okay, we'll come back to baptism. Okay, then it gets even crazier. This is about the time everyone became aware of SJWs. If you can't see, that's Trump at the border, keeping Mexicans out. Then that's, I don't know who that is, but she's keeping Muslims out. Then you have dictators, as Pepe. Immediately you're like, okay, I don't like that, right? You don't like, that's not fun. Now we're being offensive on purpose. But it's a frog. Because in chaos, there are no rules. When the knight goes into the cave to slay the dragon, how can you prepare for that? What, are you going to get your Knight Slayer 5000? Or your Dragon Slayer 5000? No, the knight's got a sword and armor. Well, that's great. You just put yourself in a microwave for a thing that breathes fire, guy. It's not the best idea. But how do you prepare for that? You take what you can. And at the time, knights had armor and swords and steeds, and their bravery. So in chaos, the frog can be an ally or it can be an enemy. But in most instances, when you think it's the enemy to the enemy. Because in the same way the frog makes fun of these things, we think that it's degrading them, but what he's doing is he's bringing them out. The frog is bringing them out, bringing out the enemies. He's making us aware of things. And the thing that he's making us aware of is who the enemies are. So then it got worse. But not really worse. Because all the other memes shall be gassed. Now at first you're like, okay, come on. Do we got to use the Hitler reference? I mean, really? The people who really found this offensive were not religious people. And we're going to get a little political because there's no way of avoiding it. That's the way our country's divided right now. People on the left got offended by this. Why? This is the subject matter, memes. The little pictures on the internet. You can be offended by the Nazi and Hitler the Nazi, but what it's saying is hey, let's gas the pixels. And immediately you're like, should I be angry? Okay, I don't like using Hitler as a joke, but jesters. Court jesters historically have poked fun at the king. The frog is, in this instance, is like a court jester. But usually what happens when the court jester, especially in Shakespeare, starts poking fun at the king, things get crazy. Because the king doesn't like being poked fun at. And he starts looking for the people who all hate the king. Now I want you to pause for a second, and I want you to look at our world right now and think about who's in power, really in power, and what's going on. Because this Pepe thing coincides with history, but it's also playing out a story. It's playing out a story that there are jesters in our world who are enraging a populace that are trying to gain control. I don't know if you all heard, but it's out now, the Great Reset. The left has already announced it. They're saying it out in the open. There's no crypticism in there. They're just saying the words, it's time for a Great Reset. We should use Corona to do a Great Reset. That would have happened if we didn't have people who were making them go crazy over pictures on the internet. You know what I mean? There's a certain goodness, how do I say this? There's a usefulness to the jesters. They are not figures to be strived for, but they are useful. In the same way, Judas was useful in the crucifixion. Do you get the connection now? You don't have to like the Hitler images and the Pepe stuff, but it's important to know why they're there. Because there's a story being played out. Now, these stories don't always happen. For the past 50 or 60 years, we've been in this sort of what I call a divine narrative break, where Act 2 has ended and Act 3 is starting. It's the flipping of the page. But the page has started with a group of internet people driving people who have started a religion. It's literally a religion now, guys. The left is now a religion. When you bow at the feet of black people asking for forgiveness for your whiteness, we have entered religion territory. It's no longer conspiracy theory. We're here. If those people control the levers of our society and what they want is more power, then we need somebody without any sort of moral boundaries to, hey, get some people in check here. I can't do it because I have morals, and I'm going to say that I don't like what you're doing, but there is usefulness in what's happening. And what's happening is it's not going away. The division's getting wider. So, what do you do when all the symbols are about stuff? See, in Christianity, we have baptism, we have communion, we have holidays, we have modern stuff, we have potlucks and things like that. We have this. This is like a ritual. The building itself is a symbol. We're always talking about, well, the church isn't a church building, but in a sense, we all look at this thing as a symbol. Like if I drew the really basic cartoon church building with a cross on top, you'd be like, oh, that's a church. That's symbolism. But the problem is our world is using these as our symbology. Visa, money, McDonald's food, Subway, better food. Pop-Tarts, I mean, that's not really food. It's more like prison food. Oreos. eBay, eBay's lots of stuff. UFC, that's violent stuff. It's entertainment, but it's more violent stuff. Sims 2, that's entertainment, but that's also violent stuff. Gatorade, I mean, sports, I guess. But I mean, there's a lot of symbols in here. And we all recognize every one of them. Every one of them, you could probably come up here, like, I know all those. The symbolism, the ancient symbolism of meaning is being erased, which is a bad thing. But we see that in movies, which I talked about in the beginning. So in an era of chaos, you have all this stuff going on. You have the religious person, you've got some guy, it shrunk, but up here there's a guy in prison trying to get out. There's a homeless person up here, well, he's homeless now, that's getting his stuff moved out because I guess he can afford it. But there's a whole lot of stuff in here. But the interesting thing about chaos is even in chaos there's goodness. The goodness can be retrieved. The frog goes into the pond, grabs the thing that's desired, brings it to the upper world, the real world. The knight goes down, slays the dragon, and comes out with valor as a man. That transformation happens. The problem right now is we're at the bottom of the pond. And the lines are being divided. These are some of the members of what's called the intellectual dark web. This is a group of people that have formed as a counter to the left. Everything the left talks about, getting rid of government, getting rid of cops, white supremacy, white privilege, systemic racism. They're like, hey, we just want free speech, and we want to be able to have the discussions we want to have, even if they're uncomfortable, in order to get to the truth. And these people have all been canceled at universities more than once. Well, that's interesting. A university, the word comes from uni one, versity, diversity, so out of the many one, yet we're canceling voices? Aren't we supposed to be learning stuff? That's a problem. Okay, I noticed this morning because I got the image this morning, just standing here waiting. What is the pattern you see here? The immediate pattern.
Check.
Well, it's checkered, okay. What else do we got? I heard it.
Rainbow.
Rainbow. Wait a second. Where else is there a rainbow in today's culture? Blammo. LGBTQ+. I can say it real fast. I've been saying it a lot lately, so I can say it real fast. But what's interesting is that that rainbow is a symbol for us, isn't it? Where do we relate to the rainbow?
Blood. Genesis.
Genesis, yeah, the flood, hope. This is where it's getting really weird, guys. Because we have an ancient symbol arriving in two locations. One on the side of chaos and tyranny, and the other side on freedom. But what's the Bible say about a rainbow? Well, a rainbow, it's a promise, but it appeared after a giant flood. And remember, water's chaos in the Bible. The rainbow appeared after a time of chaos. But yet, right now, it's being used as a symbol of freedom, okay, but also as a symbol of immoral freedom. What's interesting, though, is that the side of immoral freedom doesn't have any categories. Now, categories are important. The reason why categories are important is because it underlines the actual foundation of our reality. That's why there's a civil war in the LGBTQ plus movement. Yes, I said it again. Is because the lesbians and gays, they don't like the transsexuals. They don't like them. Because the transsexuals are going around and saying everyone's oh, you got me. Gender fluid, and that there is no such thing as man and female. There's only like aesthetic things, and it's all cultural. Well, that's a big disintegration of a category. Because as soon as we get rid of male and female, we get rid of things like sports, and people have been talking about that for a couple of years now. What do you do with sports when a transgender joins the UFC, which has happened? A man joining the female UFC and starting kicking the crap out of a bunch of women. Immediately, you're all like, "Oh, that's not good," because we know the difference between men and women. You know what I mean? There's an actual core difference between the bottom of the barrel man in UFC versus the top of the barrel woman in UFC. And it's a dangerous one, not just physically, but for the society. But these structures aren't just about gender. And the images aren't just about chaos versus order, although they are. And that's what it comes down to. We have one side grabbing images and using them for chaos, because originally they're like, well, the rainbow signifies everything. It's the color. It's all the colors. But it doesn't. That's not the symbolism. They're trying to redefine the symbolism. In the same way, corporations are redefining symbolism and symbols. In the same way, politicians are trying to redefine a lot of things. And in the same way, movies are starting to redefine things. So I'm going to say this as a Star Wars fan. The new Star Wars movies have absolutely no meaning in them whatsoever. They're meaningless. You have a girl that shows up in the middle of the desert, and she can fly the Millennium Falcon. Why? Because she's super awesome. Because Disney said so. It's what we call plot armor. We got to make a super cool movie with a girl in it. So let's make her fly the Millennium Falcon. There's no meaning in it, as opposed to Luke Skywalker, some farmer boy that used to fly little speeders and shoot rats, joins the rebellion at the end of doing something cool and losing a best friend and losing a mentor. Luke Skywalker earned he had a goodness in him, but he refined it through A New Hope by losing Ben Kenobi and then going and seeing Yoda. That goodness was refined. Rey didn't do any of that. Why is Kylo Ren the bad guy? Well, his parents shipped him off to boarding school with his uncle. Wow, that was deep. Thanks for that enlightenment. So that's what I'm saying, is that the stories are super important, but they're being erased. The whole Disney remake stuff of remaking all these things is because they don't understand the meaning of the stories. They're just doing what has worked in the past. There's no originality in it. There's no stories in it. Now, where it gets crazy is when we go to the Bible. So let's go to 1 Kings 13. Now, I've only got 10 minutes left, so I'm not going to be able to read it because I'm bad at reading. But I'm going to point you to the story. You can read it on your own, but we're going to go over it. We're going to go over it might not be 13. Give me a second. Oh, I'm sorry. Let's do 1 Kings 18. It's 18. So, as you're flipping, I'm gonna catch you up. So, Elijah comes on the scene. The kingdom of Jerusalem has been split. You have the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom. The southern kingdom is staying faithful to God, and what 1 Kings tells us is that they were faithful to the line of David, which means that they're still in line with God. The northern kingdom goes crazy. They start sucking all the old gods, and not only were they sucking the old gods, they're putting them in the high places. Now that symbology is really important because it's what's happening now. All the false gods, all the false imagery, all the false meanings, everything is being put in the high places where it's all noticeable. Corporate logos, commercials, movies, all the books you can read now. If you ever read a self-help book, man, help you. Because I did this one thing one time and it was fantastic. Well, you're wrong. So everything is collapsing, but there are these glimmers of hope that every once in a while you pick up a book and you're like, that was a really good book. There's actually some good elements, good meanings, but very rarely that happens. I've gotten to the point where I'm going back and reading old books, and I'm reading Don Quixote. Man, that's an awesome book. Have you read that? Oh, it's hilarious. This guy had this massive library, right? And he's got this old, kind of clunky suit of decorative armor with a decorative lance on his mantle. He's been reading these books, and he's like, you know what? One day he just woke up, and he's like, I could do it. I'm going to be a knight. And he just goes out, and his first stop to become a knight is a brothel. And so he walks in with his suit of armor on and a lance, and he thinks his donkey's a steed. So he rides on this mule, and he's like, who can stow my steed away? And the guy in the bar, the brothel owner is like looking at him, he's like, I can, sir. And everybody's mocking him throughout the whole thing. And so then Don Quixote goes in, and he finds one of the ladies who work there, and he's like, I will move heaven and earth to earn your respect and your loyalty, lady, because he thinks she's a princess. He's constructed this idea that he's actually a knight, and he's come across this castle, and so the brothel owner knights him in front of everyone, and that night he's like, okay, I've read in a book that knights have to hold their post and they can't move, and if anybody tries to move them, you have to kill them. So the people are coming through this brothel, and he's staying the night, but he's in his armor in the courtyard, and he's standing his ground, and he's got his mule with him. So the stable guy comes by to get his mule, and then Don Quixote kills him right there in the courtyard because he's a knight. He's got to do his duty. Okay. You look shocked. I think it's hilarious, but here's why. It's funny because later on, his closest friends and a priest come to his house and they start going through these books. And the priest is literally, he's like this, well, we can't destroy this book because I read it today. He starts going through all these reasons why he thinks it's a good book and they keep it. And he's like, well, we can't have this one because I've never heard anything about it. So they burn that book. And then they're going through and they bring Don Quixote back. And they're like, we have to tend you. And Don Quixote's like, yeah, okay. He's playing along. He's like, these guys are imposters. I have to get out of here. I have to return and fulfill my valor as a knight. And so the whole story is going on about Don Quixote going and coming up with these ridiculous ideas because he got to a point where he believed everything he read. Everything. He didn't have a filter. Even though the priest had a filter, it was a bad filter. But he believed everything he read, and then he went out and enacted it, and he ended up fighting a windmill, and he broke his lance, he broke his arm, his back, the friend who was with him was like, "Sir, that's," because it's a Spanish story. "Sir, that's a windmill. You cannot fight the windmill." And he's like, "I will fight the windmill." And he goes anyway, I love that story. But the point is that we don't see things like that nowadays. The deeper meaning of Don Quixote is like, listen, the symbolism and the meaning of these stories are important, but they're not primary knowledge important, remember? This is a secondary knowledge thing. These are things that you internalize. These are things about internal humanity that we have to hold on to. If you take everything and then act it out, you're going to be contradicting yourself. All right, I've just wasted 5 minutes. That's great. Okay, so in 1 Kings 18, what happens is Elijah is going around, and this is just after the act of going to the woman, and her kid was sick, and he prays to God, and the kid gets well or comes back to life. Elijah didn't really make it clear whether which. He said, "God, if you brought me here to see a kid die, well, I don't really enjoy that." So then God makes the kid well, and he's walking around, and the woman's really happy, and now we're here. So Elijah goes to the Mount Carmel, and he had gone to Ahab. And what's interesting is Ahab's servant is like, "Whoa, why are you here?" He immediately recognized Elijah, and Elijah said, "I'm here to speak to your master Ahab." He's like, "I can't let you do that. I can't go get him, because if I go get my master and then you've gone away, he's going to kill me." And then the servant stops. He's like, "Well, if I don't, you're going to kill me, because I've already seen you kill people. All right, I'll go get the master." And so he goes off. So now we're here at Mount Carmel, and what Elijah has done is he's had them erect an altar to Baal or Baal. And it's time for them to start sacrificing to Baal. And he says, "All right, you can't touch the altar." He sets the rules. Nobody can touch the altar, not me, not anybody. But to get the altar lit, you are going to call upon Baal and get this thing to light. And then they start. And what does Elijah do? He starts mocking them right out of the get-go. He's like, "You guys aren't being loud enough. Baal's way up there. You got to get really loud for him to hear you, to have him light it down here." So they start shouting even louder. He's like, "No, you got to get louder than that, guys." So he starts mocking them throughout this whole process. And they finally get so exhausted that they can't continue, and it doesn't light. And so they walk off, and it's Elijah's turn. He comes up, and he says a prayer, and God just lights it. Well, actually, before that, he soaks this thing with water. He soaks it. He's like, "Okay, actually, what I want you to do is I want you to build a pond around it. Build a little pond around it, start soaking it with water." No, more water. Now more water. So they get this thing soaked. He's like, "All right." And he says a prayer, and then God does it. Blam, fire. And then he chases all the prophets of Baal down. He says, "We got to kill them." Seriously, this is what he says. We got to kill them because essentially what he says is they're agents of chaos. They had the opportunity to repent. They have the opportunity to turn back, but we've got to kill them. Now, in context of what I'm talking about, I'm not saying we go all jihadi on them, right? I'm not saying we go start slaughtering people who are agents of chaos. What I am saying is that the symbology matches up here. We have a nation split. We have a nation that's following false gods, and then we have the other half of the nation who isn't necessarily following God, but they understand some of it. Like, that's the whole reason why they're conservatives. Because they have that moral foundation. They may not understand what's all going on there, but they hold on to something. And they can be reasoned with. This other side, they can't be reasoned. They're so locked up in their religion that even when Elijah's standing there mocking them, saying, "Hey guys, he's way up there," none of them are like, "Hey, Baal isn't way up there, man. Baal's a God, he can be everywhere he wants." No, they're like, "Dude, Elijah's right. Baal's got to be." So they start shouting louder. Because they're so wrapped up in their insanity that they think what's happening is real, just like Don Quixote. Just like the LGBTQ plus people. Just like the Democrats. Just like the universities right now. Just like the people who do critical race theory. Just like, and I could keep going. The nation is divided. Now, I was given a charge to make this Thanksgiving themed at 11:30 last night, so I will do my best. Stories are vitally important. Tolkien, in his essay, Fairy Stories, says this, that yes, fairy stories and the gift and the power of fairy can be swayed either for good or for evil. But that's true about anything what man gets involved with. The stories that you don't have to recite Beauty and the Beast tell your story with your family. Because if your stories do not go out and populate, they will never take root. I'm not talking about just the gospel and your conversion story. I'm just talking about your story. One of my favorite memories growing up is when we used to do family reunions, and we had a whole mess of the family at this park. It was a national park. Everyone was in trailers, and there was this huge lake. And one of my favorite things is we all got around the campfire, and it was a huge campfire. And we listened to the older generation talk about the big tent revivals, talk about the hippie, the Jesus freak movement, even the bad times when before the hippie movement, and they were starting to lose the youth, and then people coming and just doing crazy. They're like, hey, I want to tell you about this one time I flipped a boat on land, and so we had that story. It was a great time. But that's the point. We don't value stories anymore, and that is visible. It translates out into the real world. It translates even more to the Bible. The Bible isn't just the primary knowledge. It's not just the Greek. Oh man, I missed that part. Oh well. I was going to talk about how there's evidence. It's not important. We'll do that next time. There's so much beyond the primary knowledge of the Bible, past the Greek, past the Hebrew, past all the technical stuff. Did Jesus really say this, or did he mean this? That's all important. That's only getting you on the surface level of the water. All this other symbology is going to settle the waters of the chaos, so that like a Caribbean ocean, you can see right through it. You can see, and here's why the water is considered chaos in Judaism, is that in the water there is anything. We got stories of krakens. We've got stories of giant squids. We've got the whole thing about piracy is to go out and tame the chaos and make it your own. That's why pirates are pirates, like real pirates. Yeah. Yeah. So, in a sense, this idea of getting into the story of the Bible is to get you to that bottom layer to be able to transverse and look through the chaos of what's happening now. Because we're not doing well. All of us. We're losing things that give us meaning, even outside the Bible. All right. That's it. Go home.